All right, world history. So today we are focusing on World War One, and it's also known as the Great War. Now, in your reading in chapter 29, section 1, you've probably already read a lot about this, but I just wanted to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page about the causes of World War One. So this is the map of the world when we're starting World War One. Now, it's probably something similar. You guys just had a zoomed in image for the map that you just completed. But remember, we're right on the heels of imperialism. So when we look at this map, it's really trying to understand who had influence where. For example, France is the dark blue indigo color. They had a lot of North and West Africa, and you see kind of that blue also in Asia. So imperialism definitely has a major impact here, and we'll see why in a moment. In order to understand World War One, you have to understand a little bit of background, right? So the war lasted a little over 4 years. It started on June 28th, 1914, which is known as the spark of the war, and lasted until November 11th, 1918, unofficially, when it ended with the Treaty of Versailles. There's about 15 million deaths total, and as we know from Unit 6, World War One comes from a time of rapid, or after a time of rapid industrialization and imperialism. Industrialization, like we saw in Britain, right? Factories, resources, and then looking outwards and needing that and taking over other places. And that's that imperialism aspect. So when we talk about World War One, we typically talk about it in terms of MAIN, or the main causes of World War One. And the MAIN is actually it's an acronym, right? So it stands for the 4 causes of World War One. Now it's important to note that all of these causes are underground, and they're all happening at the same time. And eventually you'll see the spark, or what leads to the official start of the war. So MAIN stands for militarism, the alliance system, imperialism, and nationalism. And some of these words or terms you've already seen before, so they shouldn't be completely new. So militarism, we talk about this as a cause of imperialism. The idea of militarism is this glorification of the military. It's a mass expansion of armies and navies and buildup of weapons in other countries. Well, when a country is building up their weapons and another country sees this, they're probably thinking, why do they need all those weapons? Why do they need such a large army? Why do they need such a large navy? And so then another country will want to start building up their military too, because they're like, well, if they have it, they're probably preparing for something. We need to prepare for something else. And so this is kind of a common theme of the time period prior to World War One. Additionally, governments were turning to military leaders for advice. And, for better or for worse, a military leader, at the end of the day, their kind of job is in military. So if there's an issue and a government leader says, hey, I don't know how I should respond to this issue, there's a tendency for a military leader to say, well, let's take some military action. And so militarism was further fueled by this thing called the arms race. And the arms race really took place between the British and the German Navy. The British obviously started to build a really strong navy. Well, that makes sense, right? Because they're in Ireland. I know you guys can't respond, but hopefully you said out loud. So the British started to build up this navy. Well, Germany was also ramping up their navy because they were trying to get imperial land. They wanted colonies. And so all of these Western European countries started to build up their armies. And you see this in the chart here. And interestingly enough, Germany took this concept and expanded it. So they spent 73% more on defense expenditures in this increase, right, in that 4-year time period. They spent more than France, Britain, and Russia combined, which, if you're one of those countries, you're thinking, why does Germany need all this, right? And this becomes key in a moment. And then so you just have some more information on the arms race here. Feel free to take a pause if this is something you're interested in. If not, no big deal. Which takes us to the next cause of World War I, and this is the alliance system. So when all of these countries were gaining and building up their military, they started to not trust each other. And so the big powers, the Western European countries, signed agreements and promised to defend each other. But here's the kicker. All of these agreements or alliances were secret. So no one knew about them. So all of these countries are rushing to make secret friends. And the theory was that there would be powerful alliances that everyone would want to attack. And theoretically, you shouldn't have common enemies. But what ends up happening is because of the secrecy, the enemy lines get a little bit blurry. When we try to understand who the big powers were, we have two main power systems or two main alliances in World War I. And these are the Allied powers versus the Central powers. Now, it's important to note that all of these countries had little mini countries that were also supporting an alliance system or the other alliance system. We're looking at the big players here, right? So the Allied powers include France, Great Britain, at the start of the war, Russia, who eventually backs out of the war because there's a revolution going on there, and eventually the United States also joins the Allied powers. Now, the Allied powers are also known as the Triple Entente. I remember it this way, that Entente is a French word, and so the French are part of that alliance system. Now, the other alliance system are the Central powers, and here you have Germany. In the beginning of the war, Italy actually eventually switches over to the Allied powers, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire or Turkey. And these are also known as the Triple Alliance. So there's a lot of different words. Make sure you're taking note of that on your note card sheet. So when we're looking at this complicated system of secret alliances, you would think that theoretically everyone would have common enemies, right? But realistically, like I mentioned earlier, the lines get a little bit blurry because there are people in other countries that may not support the government that joined an alliance system with another country. And again, these are secrets. So this is what makes it really, really fuzzy and really, really important once the war starts. And so if we're looking at a map of where this is going, this is from your mapping activity, you have your Triple Entente here, this orange color, so Great Britain, France, and Russia. And then in that red color, you have Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, which then begs the question, which alliance system actually has the advantage? And you can make an argument for both, and both of those arguments are actually really, really credible when we look at the military history of the war, which, by the way, I would never make you guys remember for now. And so these are the leaders of the alliance systems, right? So these are the Triple Entente leaders here, and these are the leaders of the Triple Alliance. So Allied powers and Central powers. Some interesting things to note. One, I want you guys to take note of all of these men's mustaches. They're very fancy. They're very decorated military leaders, and they're actually royalty. So if you look at these three guys right at the top here, this is Kaiser Wilhelm, this is Nicholas II, and George V. So Kaiser Wilhelm is the leader of Germany, Nicholas II is the leader of Russia, and George V of Great Britain. And here's the wild thing. They're actually all cousins. So when they were younger, they would play together, and eventually they ended up being enemies on different sides during World War I. And so again, here is a map of Europe looking at those two alliance systems. Which brings us to our third cause of World War I. And this is one that we actually explored last unit, and we're going to continue to explore this unit. And this is imperialism. So remember, imperialism is a domination of one country's political, economic, and cultural life by another country. We know the causes, we studied them last unit. They're economic, political, militaristic, humanitarianism, and social Darwinism. So imperialism fuels this race for more land. Well, if you're racing for more land, you want more military to protect that land. And that gets really competitive. Which finally brings us to our final cause of World War I, and that is nationalism. And nationalism is this extreme form of pride for one's country or nation. Now, here's an important thing to note. Nationalism and patriotism are not the same thing. Patriotism is you are proud to be from your country. Nationalism means you feel superior to others, which fuels into that idea of humanitarianism and social Darwinism. And people felt very powerful and wanted to conquer more and more land to gain power and influence. So all of these countries, these Western European countries, were battling it out with each other, which leads to intense rivalry and aggression. Because when you feel powerful, you get more aggressive. And this aggression fuels militarism, is combined with imperialism, and then you get the alliance systems. But at the end of the day, it's not it, right? So these are four underlying or low-key causes of World War I. World War I doesn't actually start until the spark. And the spark takes place in this part of Europe. You guys notice I can't snap. The spark takes place in a part of Europe known as the Balkans. And so this is the modern day Balkans. So at this point, Serbia had gained independence from Austria-Hungary. But so here's Serbia. Many Serbs were living in neighboring Bosnia, which was still ruled by the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, right? So we're looking at this area specifically. And the story comes with this man, and there's a secret alliance system, and there's a sandwich involved. So I'm going to have you guys actually watch a video on it. It'll be next. And then we'll talk about it in a moment. All right, let me go ahead and play you guys that video.
As any schoolboy or schoolgirl knows, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, June 28, 1914, was the match that touched off the conflagration of World War I. My name is Indy Nidell, and this channel, The Great War, follows World War I week by week exactly 100 years later. First, I'd like to talk a little about Franz Ferdinand himself, so here's a very brief bio. He was born in 1863, one of Austria's 70 archdukes. It wasn't called Austria-Hungary yet. Now, he became very wealthy just before he reached his teens, when his cousin died and he was chosen to inherit a vast estate. Another death in 1889 changed his destiny enormously, the suicide of his cousin, Crown Prince Rudolf. This left Ferdinand's father heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, but he immediately renounced his position, leaving Franz Ferdinand next in line to rule the empire. He was still in this position when he died, by which time Emperor Franz Joseph was 84 years old and Ferdinand was 50. Now, if you read pretty much any bio, long or short, on Franz Ferdinand, you'll discover that not a whole lot of people actually liked him. Well, except his wife, the Duchess Sophia. She was a Bohemian aristocrat, but without actual royal blood, so the imperial house made certain that neither Sophia nor any of her children could ever inherit the throne. This also meant they weren't much accepted by the Austrian aristocracy, in spite of his position as the next emperor, and a lot of people went out of their way to treat the Archduke and Duchess like crap. One other thing that every bio is sure to mention is Ferdinand's passion for hunting. He apparently recorded over 250,000 creatures killed in his 50 years on Earth. Now, I suppose that's really neither here nor there, but what is here and there are Franz Ferdinand's beliefs. He was very conservative and, let's just call it, unenlightened to be polite. He hated the Hungarians. He thought the Slavs were less than human, and he actually referred to Serbs as pigs. He was also very strongly Catholic, which carried with it the anti-Jewish, anti-Jesuit baggage of the times. He did love his wife, though, with a great passion, and the preservation of the Austrian Empire. And that is something we'll come back to in a few minutes. Before that, let's meet his assassin, Gavrilo Princip. Princip was a member of the Young Bosnians, one of several violent secret societies in the Balkans, and one who decided to kill Franz Ferdinand when he announced his June visit to Bosnia in March 1914. Okay, so in May, Princip and two associates went to Belgrade, Serbia, where they were provided with 4 pistols and 6 bombs by the Black Hand, and Princip had some shooting practice in a city park. Now, that's not especially relevant. I just thought I'd like to point out that people had shooting practice in city parks back then. So, at the end of May, Princip and company took an 8-day journey to Sarajevo, planning to kill the Archduke. It's important to note here that the Austrian authorities and the Archduke himself were aware of the danger of some sort of murder attempt, since these sort of things were pretty commonplace in the empire. and especially the Balkans. Now here's a quote from Franz Ferdinand the day he began his journey to Sarajevo and his car overheated. "Our journey starts with an extremely promising omen. Here our car burns, and down there they will throw bombs at us." So, the evening before they were supposed to arrive in Sarajevo, right? Franz Ferdinand and Sofia surprised everyone by turning up early, just on impulse. And they had a really nice time wandering around the town, which was a pretty exotic place back then. And later that evening came one of the great foreshadowing moments of all time. A member of the Bosnian parliament who had urged Ferdinand and Sofia to cancel the whole trip for reasons of safety was presented to Sofia, and she said this: "Things do not always turn out the way you say they will. Wherever we have been, everyone, down to the last Serb, has greeted us with such great friendliness, politeness, and true warmth that we are very happy with our visit." Okay, so far so good. But then the guy, whose name was Sunarik, answered this: "Your Highness, I pray to God that when I have the honor of meeting you again tomorrow night, you can repeat those words." Then they had a big banquet that night, and late the next morning, coincidentally their 14th wedding anniversary, the Archducal motorcade left Sarajevo station. No fewer than 7 young Bosnian hitmen were deployed on the town's bridges, one of which the Archduke had to cross. Now, one of the young Bosnians threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but it bounced off his hood before it exploded, wounding 2 of the Archduke's men. The motorcade drove on to the town hall, and they listened to a bunch of the usual speeches. And then, after that, Franz Ferdinand changed his plans. He decided to visit the men who'd been hurt by the bomb to see if they were okay. So he wanted to go toward the hospital. But there was a lot of confusion over the new route and who'd been told what and who hadn't been told what. So when the Archduke's driver turned off the Apple key, the general sharing Ferdinand's car told the driver, no, back up and continue on Apple key. So the driver stopped the car because it had no functioning reverse gear, and he stopped it right next to where Gavrilo Princip was standing. So Princip raised his pistol and fired twice from a distance of only a few feet away. Sophie died instantly, and Franz Ferdinand's last words were, Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children." Franz Ferdinand died shortly after. Now, it's pretty amazing when you think about it that this whole enterprise could have possibly succeeded. I mean, it was so incredibly amateurish, and had the Austrian authorities taken any precautions whatsoever, well, I mean, think about it. There are loads of people who think the Black Hand had more to do with it, but you'd think they'd plan a little better, or heck, plan at all. Anyhow, here were the immediate results. Word of the assassination spread instantly throughout Europe, and in Bosnia, by the end of July, more than 5,000 Serbs had been jailed, many of whom were later hanged when the war broke out. Princip was put in prison, being 27 days too young to receive the death penalty under Austrian law. Now, there were 1 or 2 European leaders who were seriously worried about the political consequences of the act, but most of Europe reacted by thinking it was more of the same. The usual Balkan business, another Balkan killing. There was very little mourning, even in Vienna, for the unloved Franz Ferdinand, and his funeral service only lasted 15 minutes. But there was one thing that became apparent only years later. You see, Princip, or the Serbs, or the Black Hand, or whoever you like to say was behind the killing, really got the wrong guy. Franz Ferdinand, for all his talk about Serbs being pigs, or Russian autocracy being a good model for the future, for all his backward and outdated beliefs, had strong opinions on 2 very important things. 1, in contrast to most of the empire, he was absolutely against any war with Russia and stated repeatedly that he would do anything in his power to prevent it. And 2, since he put the empire above his personal beliefs, and to make the empire work once again, he was sympathetic to the idea of making the bipartite state of Austria-Hungary into a tripartite state of Austria, Hungary, and a union of the Slavic peoples as the third part of the empire. So when a Serb killed Franz Ferdinand, it was a killing that was not only against Serbian interests, but since the Austrian Empire used the killing as a justification to invade Serbia, even if it meant war with Russia, Princip killed the one and only person in the empire who was determined and able to...
All right. So it's a wild story, right? The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by Gavrilo Princip was the spark that started World War One. Now it's important to note, and kind of a question to think about, like all of these domino effects, right? Like if the Archduke was not assassinated, would we even have World War One? Who knows, right? Because all of those underlying circumstances were still there, those main causes. So just a question to consider, right? And so what are the consequences? Austria-Hungary is mad. They want to declare war on Serbia as revenge for the assassination. So you have Austria-Hungary versus Serbia. But Serbia's protector is Russia, and they come in and want to help Serbia. So now we're at Austria-Hungary versus Serbia and Russia. Well, Germany sees this and is Austria-Hungary's friend, so they come to their end. And now you have Austria-Hungary and Germany versus Serbia and Russia. The alliance system has been activated and war begins on June 28th, 1914 as a result of the assassination of the Archduke and the four main causes: militarism, the alliance system, imperialism, and nationalism. So here's the question. In the comments on this video, I want you to tell me, who do we blame for the start of World War I? Do we blame an idea like imperialism or militarism? Do we blame a specific country like Austria-Hungary or Serbia? Let me know. Let me know in the comments, 2 to 3 sentences. Who do we blame for the start of World War I? All right, team, good luck. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.